I've always been attracted to people that live totally off the land. So in the beginning of my career, I traveled around to tribal communities, and I carried this little studio in a backpack, and I would set up my lights, and I started doing portraits of indigenous people. The thing I was immediately attracted to was their simple lifestyle and their natural, unvarnished beauty. However, it wasn't long before I overcame my romantic vision of their lives and began to realize the many problems that affected their day-to-day existence. I began using individual portraits and stories to illustrate various human rights abuses faced by people in the developing world. After spending several years documenting these issues, I began to understand that one of the most universal human rights abuses was the discrimination and oppression of women and girls. Since then, I've spent several years seeking out and documenting the extraordinary women that are confronting these issues and acting as catalysts of change in their communities. In the fall of 2004, I traveled to Ethiopia to meet one of these heroic women. Living in one of the harshest places in the world, the Afar are one of the poorest ethnic groups in Ethiopia. 1 in 3 children will die before the age of 5, and only 2% of the population can read and write. For centuries, the Afar have practiced female genital cutting. Girls are cut in groups of 20 by the age of 12, in a ceremony attended only by women. Although it's an important rite of passage in Afar culture, it often results in serious health problems and lasting emotional trauma. In the fall of 2004, I traveled to the Afar territory to visit a community that was attempting to put an end to this harmful practice. When I arrived, I met Abai, a 28-year-old humanitarian worker. She offered to take me to a group of women who were shaping community decisions for the very first time. During our long and dusty ride through the desert, Abai told me her story. It was then I began to realize that she was the heart of the changes in her community. Out of 100 girls in rural India, only 18 will reach the 8th grade, and only 1 will complete high school. Uneducated girls risk a higher rate of maternal and child mortality. They will likely marry before their 15th birthday, and they will most likely never know their basic human rights. Of the millions of children around the world who never get an education, the majority are girls. In rural communities, many parents don't see the benefit of educating their daughters, since it would be a hardship to lose their help with the domestic chores. In 1999, India made a bold commitment to educate all children through grade 6. I came to India to see how this developing country, with its huge, diverse population, was accomplishing this monumental task. Every 5 seconds, someone is burned in a developing country, and few realize the scope and impact of burn injuries.
Burns is a painful disease, emotionally and physically. The treatment is painful, the follow-up is painful, the response from society is painful.
Compounding the large scope is the fact that proper burn treatment is almost non-existent for the world's poor. But one woman in Sri Lanka is out to change that. Dr. Chandini Pereira is helping burn survivors have a second chance at life. Violence against women, throwing acid or setting them on fire, and even self-immolation is tragically the reason for most burns in Dr. Pereira's unit. In fact, they're on the rise in Sri Lanka.
In our culture, in a way, getting beaten by a man is sort of seen as quite acceptable, really, because you don't talk about domestic violence. We don't.
She said that the men who attack their victims with acid typically are only fined $5. She has fought tirelessly for victims' rights. I've spent several years documenting humanitarian issues throughout Africa. Malawi is one of the poorest nations on earth. As in so many developing countries, the women here grow the food, collect the firewood and water, take care of the children and animals, but rarely do they handle the family's income. Genesee, her husband and 2 daughters, were one of the families here who, as subsistence farmers, live on less than $1 a day. It's difficult to save anything and nearly impossible to get an affordable loan. Back in 2000, a program was introduced in Genesee's village called Village Savings and Loan, or VSNL. 70 families showed up to the meeting, but it wasn't long before 60 of them walked out. Unlike the microcredit programs, VSNL offers no grants and no loans. Genesee was very skeptical and even discouraged her friends from joining VSNL. When Genesee saw what was happening with her friends who had started the program, she had a change of heart and decided to join. She committed to saving 5 cents a week. She stuck with it, and today, 5 years later, the results I saw were almost unbelievable. Over 700 sex workers inhabit the brothel in Tangail, Bangladesh. Many were sold into sexual slavery before their 14th birthday, often by someone they trusted. Once in the brothel, they are so stigmatized, they usually spend the rest of their lives there. Akai was 13 when her aunt sold her to a madam in the Tangail brothel. At the time, she thought she was going to a job at a garment factory. Eventually, she was able to buy back her freedom. However, life in the brothel left her deeply depressed. When a suicide attempt failed, Akai decided to use her life to improve the lot of her fellow sex workers. Although prostitution is legal in Bangladesh, sex workers have lacked basic human rights. They were not allowed to open bank accounts, go to health clinics, have a proper burial, or send their children to school. They were routinely beat up when they demanded that their clients use a condom. Since women over 30 are considered to be sexually undesirable and so stigmatized that they can't leave, they typically end up doing domestic work within the brothel to survive. Despite being arrested 3 times, Akai managed to form an organization to advocate for sex workers' rights. Since her group began, condom use has gone from almost 0 to 86%, and the women have been able to open bank accounts and send their children to school. And most importantly, the number of 12 to 13-year-olds sold into the brothel has dropped dramatically. Back in Malawi, 8 years after the very first VSNL was started in Genesee's village, 25 groups have started on their own without depending on any outside support. Genesee was able to buy fertilizer and an ox in the first couple of years. Now she owns rental houses and land to farm. It's because of these women's discipline to save and repay the loans that make VSNL such a success. And it's women's tendencies to invest in their families that make VSNL so effective in fighting poverty. In Sri Lanka, Kanchana was a victim of an acid burn attack by a jealous boyfriend. Chandini's respect and encouragement allowed Kanchana to graduate from nursing school at the top of her class.
And Kanchana is a successful story. You know, she's gone out with her burns. Everyone in the hospital knows Kanchana because she was really bright. She became 11th in the whole island, and that for 30,000 nurses. And she did it despite many odds, you know, many surgeries, lack of hair, scarring, wearing a mask. And so Kanchana is difficult to hide. She's an empowered woman.
Chandini knew she could make a far greater difference transforming the lives of burn victims than providing cosmetic surgery for only the richest of her country. Humanitarian organizations are supporting India's historic commitment to education with a unique program called Udaan. Udaan was especially developed to reach older girls who missed out on an education. Pinky was a graduate from the very first Udaan class and is now in college and has her own apartment. This level of independence for a young single woman is extremely rare in her town. Today, the educational landscape across rural India is changing, and Udaan graduates serve as shining examples to those in their villages who weren't quite sure why a girl needed an education. Finally, back in Ethiopia, when Abai turned 8, her mother announced it was time for her circumcision ceremony. Much to everyone's surprise, Abai said no. Her mother insisted, and a Far woman who had not been cut would be considered unclean and could never marry. When her mother's demands became unbearable, Abai ran away to live with her godfather in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia's capital. Shortly after her 18th birthday, Abai returned to her former village. Determined to help improve the health and education of her people, she applied for a job as a station agent in the village. Over the next 5 years, Abai helped open a primary school and 3 health posts. Very slowly, she gained the confidence of some of the women and began to discuss female genital cutting. It was a taboo to even discuss the subject. When word got out that Abai had the women talking about genital cutting, the reaction was violent. One man threatened Abai with a gun, accusing her of being paid to come back and destroy their culture. Abai decided to take a different tack. She asked the women to allow one of the cutting ceremonies to be filmed. When the male elders saw the film, they were shocked. They had never seen a cutting ceremony. They immediately called a meeting, and after 4 days of debate, they voted 15-2 to end the practice of female genital cutting in a washvintali. You know, I feel so honored to have met these women at the forefront of a growing movement to bring social and economic justice to women and girls worldwide. My hope is that their stories will move and inspire you. We've created a website for those of you who feel moved to contribute to the empowerment of women and girls around the world. The website lists various organizations and opportunities to volunteer, study abroad, or help women in the developing world tell their own stories. If you're already contributing to the movement and have a story to tell that might inspire or help others get involved, we have a place on the website for you to tell your story and share your experience. Ultimately, this is not simply a women's movement or a movement honoring human rights. At a deeper level, this is a movement to restore balance between the feminine and masculine qualities and values that inform our cultures, our institutions, and ourselves.